The warm Seattle sun was setting as Special Agent Wilson made his way through the bustling airport terminal. After wrapping up a complex 3-week operation that had successfully prevented a potential security threat, he was more than ready to head back home to D.C. His black leather shoes clicked against the polished floor as he walked past duty-free shops and crowded cafes, pulling his carry-on suitcase behind him. The past few weeks had been intense. As one of the FBI's most experienced counterterrorism agents, he'd seen his fair share of challenging situations over his 15-year career. But this last case had been particularly demanding, requiring countless sleepless nights and careful coordination with local law enforcement. Now, with the mission accomplished, his thoughts drifted to the simple comforts of home: his own bed, his favorite local diner, and the quiet park where he loved to take his morning jogs. At the gate, he checked his phone one last time, responding to a few quick messages from his team back at headquarters. They'd done good work here in Seattle, and he made sure to acknowledge everyone's contributions. That's the kind of leader he always strived to be, someone who recognized the effort of others and fostered a spirit of teamwork. As he waited in the priority boarding line, he couldn't help but notice the mix of travelers around him. Business people in suits tapping away at their laptops, families trying to keep their excited children in check, and tourists wearing their brand new Seattle souvenir sweatshirts. It was a snapshot of America that he'd sworn to protect, and moments like these reminded him why he loved his job despite its challenges. The gate agent called for first-class boarding, and Wilson stepped forward, ticket in hand. He'd accumulated enough frequent flyer miles over his years of service to upgrade his seat, a small luxury he occasionally allowed himself after particularly tough assignments. The agent smiled warmly as she scanned his boarding pass, and he returned the gesture with a polite nod. Walking down the jet bridge, he adjusted his navy blue blazer and straightened his tie, a habit from years of maintaining a professional appearance. His weapon was properly stored in his checked luggage according to protocol, but he carried his badge with him, as always. 15 years of service had taught him to be prepared for anything, even on routine flights. As he approached the aircraft door, the flight attendant greeted him with a cheerful, "Welcome aboard." He responded with a friendly smile, already looking forward to settling into his seat with the new book he downloaded to his tablet, a historical novel about the Civil War that he'd been wanting to read for months. The first-class cabin was quiet and cool, a welcome respite from the airport's hustle and bustle. Wilson found his seat, 2A, a window spot with extra legroom. He carefully placed his carry-on in the overhead compartment and sat down, finally allowing his shoulders to relax. The leather seat was comfortable, and for a moment, he closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Little did he know that this routine flight home was about to become anything but ordinary. The next few minutes would test not only his patience, but also his professional composure in ways that decades of FBI training couldn't have prepared him for. But for now, in these peaceful moments before takeoff, he simply enjoyed the quiet, watching through the window as ground crew members efficiently went about their duties in the fading daylight. The cabin crew began their pre-flight preparations, and more passengers started boarding the plane. Wilson pulled out his tablet, ready to dive into his book during the 6-hour flight back to the East Coast. After the intensity of the past few weeks, he was looking forward to some quiet time with a good story. Sometimes, he thought, the best part of finishing a mission was these moments of calm that followed. But fate had other plans for this particular journey home. The peaceful moment was shattered by the sound of sharp, clicking heels approaching down the aisle. A woman in her mid-50s, wearing an expensive beige designer suit and carrying a leather handbag that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, stopped abruptly at row 2. Her perfectly maintained blonde hair was pulled back in a tight bun, and her face wore an expression of immediate displeasure as her eyes fell on Special Agent Wilson. She double-checked her boarding pass, then looked back at Wilson's seat with growing agitation. Her red-painted lips pressed into a thin line as she raised her hand, snapping her fingers to get the flight attendant's attention. The sound made several nearby passengers look up from their phones and magazines. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice carrying through the first-class cabin with deliberate volume. "There seems to be some sort of—" She paused, giving Wilson a dismissive glance. "Mix-up with the seating arrangements." The flight attendant, a professional with over a decade of experience named Lee, approached with a patient smile. "How can I help you, ma'am?" "Well," the woman said, holding her designer bag closer to her chest, "I'm quite certain there must be an error. I specifically booked first class because of its certain standards." She emphasized the last two words while staring pointedly at Wilson, who remained calmly reading his tablet. Lee glanced at Wilson, then back at the woman. "Ma'am, could I see your boarding pass, please?" The woman thrust her ticket forward. "I'm in 2B, and I paid full price for this seat. I'm a platinum member, you know. I fly this route at least twice a month." "Yes, ma'am, 2B is your assigned seat," Lee confirmed, maintaining his professional demeanor. "Everything appears to be in order." "In order?" The woman's voice rose even higher. "Look, I don't mean to make a scene, but surely you must understand my concerns about the situation." She pulled out her phone, beginning to record. "I'm going to have to contact my friends at corporate about this. I know several board members personally." Other passengers were now openly watching the scene unfold. A young woman in row 3 had her mouth slightly open in shock. An elderly gentleman across the aisle shook his head in disapproval, not at Wilson, but at the woman's behavior. The woman continued, her voice getting louder with each word. "I demand to speak to the head flight attendant. This is absolutely unacceptable. I've been flying first class for 20 years, and I've never had to deal with such a disruption to my travel experience." Wilson finally looked up from his tablet, his face a masterclass in composure. Years of FBI training had taught him how to remain calm in far more dangerous situations, but there was something particularly challenging about maintaining professional dignity in the face of such blatant prejudice. Lee stood his ground, positioning himself slightly between the woman and Wilson. "Ma'am, all our passengers who have first-class tickets are welcome in first class. If you're uncomfortable with your seat assignment, we can certainly check if there are any other available seats in the cabin." "Available seats? I shouldn't have to move. I'm a valued customer." She was now filming everything with her phone, her hand shaking with apparent anger. "I want to know how he got this seat. There must be some mistake with the booking system." The tension in the cabin was palpable. Other passengers were either staring at their phones in embarrassment or openly watching the scene unfold. A few had taken out their own phones, quietly recording the woman's behavior. In row 4, a man in a business suit looked like he wanted to say something but hadn't yet found the courage. The woman's voice dripped with condescension as she continued, "I demand to see his boarding pass. I simply cannot believe that he legitimately purchased a first-class ticket." She emphasized the word legitimately with such disdain that several passengers audibly gasped. Little did she know, her next few actions would lead to consequences she never expected, and her attempt to assert her perceived superiority was about to backfire in a way that would change her life forever. The situation in the first-class cabin was quickly spiraling out of control. The woman, still firmly gripping her phone and filming everything, had shifted from subtle hints to outright accusations. Her voice carried through the cabin as she paced back and forth in the narrow aisle, making everyone increasingly uncomfortable. "I pay thousands of dollars to fly first class," she declared, speaking as much to her phone camera as to anyone else. "I expect a certain level of, well, let's just say I expect to travel with people of a similar standard." She gave Wilson another pointed look, making her meaning crystal clear to everyone watching. Lee, the flight attendant, tried once again to defuse the situation. "Ma'am, please lower your voice. All our passengers deserve to be treated with respect." "Respect?" she scoffed, her designer bracelet jangling as she gestured wildly. "Do you know who I am? I'm the executive vice president of one of the largest real estate firms in the country. I have contacts everywhere. This is going straight to social media, and my followers will be very interested to see how this airline is managing their first-class cabin. Wilson remained remarkably composed, his hands folded neatly on his lap. He'd faced down actual terrorists with less drama than this woman was creating over a plane seat. A few rows back, passengers were whispering among themselves, some shaking their heads in disbelief. "Look at him, just sitting there," the woman continued, her voice dripping with disdain. "He probably used some sort of discount ticket or travel points. That's not right. I paid full price for my seat." A younger passenger in the row behind Wilson couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Ma'am, those are some pretty bold assumptions you're making. Maybe you should stay out of this," the woman snapped, turning her phone to film the young passenger instead. "This is between me and the airline. I'm documenting everything for my lawyer." The cabin crew huddled near the galley, discussing how to handle the escalating situation. The lead flight attendant stepped forward, a stern expression on her face. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. If you can't maintain appropriate behavior, we'll need to take further action." But the woman was too far gone in her self-righteous tirade to heed the warning. She pulled out her laptop, making a show of typing furiously. "I'm emailing corporate right now. This is absolutely unacceptable. I've never been so insulted in my life." Several more passengers had their phones out now, recording her behavior rather than Wilson. The irony seemed lost on her as she continued her rant about maintaining standards and the decline of luxury travel. "And another thing," she announced, standing up straighter and adjusting her expensive jacket. "I demand to know how he got access to this cabin. Did someone let him in? Was there some sort of special accommodation made? Because if there was, I need to know about it. This is discrimination against paying customers." The absurdity of her claiming discrimination while actively discriminating against another passenger wasn't lost on anyone in the cabin. A businessman across the aisle caught Wilson's eye and mouthed, "I'm sorry," with a sympathetic shake of his head. The woman's voice grew louder as she sensed she was losing the support of her fellow passengers. "Don't any of you understand? This is about maintaining the quality we pay for. I'm doing this for all of us." Nobody was buying it. The tension in the cabin had reached a breaking point, and something had to give. The woman's hand trembled as she continued filming, her perfectly manicured nails clicking against her phone case. She was so caught up in her performance for social media that she failed to notice Wilson slowly reaching into his jacket pocket. The next few moments would leave her speechless, as she was about to learn a valuable lesson about making assumptions and the true meaning of authority and respect. The first-class cabin had become an impromptu theater, with every passenger now fully invested in the unfolding drama. Phones were raised like periscopes from nearly every seat, capturing the woman's increasingly outrageous behavior. The soft hum of the plane's ventilation system was nearly drowned out by the murmurs of disapproval from other passengers. A distinguished-looking gentleman in his 60s, wearing a weathered bomber jacket with military pins, had been watching the scene with growing frustration. His hands, bearing the calluses of someone who'd served his country, gripped the armrests tightly. Finally, he'd seen enough. "That's it," he announced, standing up slowly. The woman swung around to face him, her phone still recording. "I've been sitting here watching you harass this man for the past 10 minutes, and I can't stay quiet anymore." The retired military officer's voice carried the weight of authority earned through years of service. "I've flown all over this world, ma'am, and I've never seen behavior as shameful as yours. You're not protecting any standards here. You're only showing your own prejudice." The woman's face flushed red, but she quickly tried to regain her composure. "This doesn't concern you," she snapped, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "I'm simply trying to maintain the level of service that I paid for." A young woman in a business suit 2 rows ahead turned around. "Really? Because all I've seen is you harassing another passenger while making wild assumptions about how he got his ticket. I work in corporate communications, and I can tell you right now, this isn't going to end well for you. More passengers began speaking up. A couple returning from their honeymoon shared looks of disgust. A college professor grading papers paused his work to shake his head disapprovingly. Even a child, no more than 7 years old, tugged on his mother's sleeve and whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Mom, why is that lady being so mean?" The retired officer wasn't finished. "You know what I see? I see a hard-working American being harassed for no good reason. I've spent my life defending people's rights, and I'm not about to sit quietly while you trample on them." The woman's phone was now shaking visibly in her hand. "You don't understand. I have status with this airline. I'm a platinum member." Her voice had taken on a slightly hysterical edge. "Status?" A quiet voice came from an elderly woman across the aisle. "My dear, the only status you're showing right now is that of a bully. I've been flying first class since before you were born, and this behavior would have been unacceptable then, just as it is now." The chorus of disapproval grew stronger. A young tech entrepreneur stood up. "I've got the whole thing on video, by the way. Would be a shame if this went viral." He smiled without warmth. "My YouTube channel has quite a few followers." The woman's carefully maintained facade began to crack. She looked around the cabin, seemingly realizing for the first time that she had no allies in her crusade. Her perfectly applied makeup couldn't hide the nervous twitching of her eye as she saw phone after phone pointed in her direction. Wilson remained a portrait of composure through it all, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the woman's increasing agitation. He hadn't said a word, hadn't needed to. The other passengers had become his advocates, united in their condemnation of her behavior. The tension in the cabin was about to reach its breaking point. The woman, cornered by the wall of disapproval surrounding her, was like a champagne bottle ready to pop. But the real surprise was still to come, a revelation that would turn her world upside down and teach her a lesson she'd never forget. The woman stood in the aisle, her designer heels planted firmly on the carpet, still clutching her phone like a shield. Despite the overwhelming opposition from other passengers, she seemed determined to stand her ground. That's when everything changed. Special Agent Wilson, who had remained remarkably calm throughout the entire ordeal, slowly reached into his jacket pocket. The movement was deliberate, almost graceful. The woman's eyes followed his hand, her expression a mix of confusion and lingering indignation. "Since you're so concerned about my qualifications to sit in first class," he spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a quiet authority that immediately commanded attention. "Perhaps this will help clarify things." He pulled out a small leather wallet and flipped it open, revealing the golden FBI badge and credentials that gleamed under the cabin lights. The silence that followed was deafening. Several passengers gasped. The young tech entrepreneur who had been recording everything let out a low whistle. The woman's face went through a remarkable transformation. First came confusion, then recognition, followed by a dawning horror as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. The phone she'd been using to record everything suddenly felt very heavy in her hand. "I've been with the FBI's counterterrorism division for 15 years, Wilson continued, his voice level and professional. "I just finished leading a 3-week operation that helped keep this country safe. And yes, I earned these frequent flyer miles through my service." The retired military officer in the bomber jacket couldn't help but smile. "Well, would you look at that?" he said, shaking his head with a mixture of amusement and satisfaction. The woman's perfectly manicured hand flew to her throat. Her phone slipped from her other hand, clattering onto the fold-down tray table. The screen was still recording, now capturing her own moment of comeuppance. I didn't," she stammered, her earlier confidence evaporating like morning dew under a hot sun. The first-class cabin, which moments ago had been filled with tension, now held a different kind of energy, the collective satisfaction of witnessing justice being served. Wilson continued, his calm demeanor unchanged. The real threat to the quality of this flight isn't my presence, ma'am. It's the disruptive behavior you've been displaying. As someone who actually works to protect the standards of this country, I can assure you that those standards include treating all people with dignity and respect. The flight attendants, who had been watching nervously from the galley, now wore small smiles. Lee, who had dealt with the situation so professionally from the start, stepped forward. Ma'am, in light of your behavior and the destruction you've caused, I need to ask, would you like to voluntarily deplane, or should I call airport security? The woman's face, already pale, turned almost ghost white. Her carefully constructed world of privilege and entitlement was crumbling around her. The other passengers watched intently, many still recording, as she struggled to process how spectacularly her assumptions had backfired. A child's voice broke the silence. Mom, is that man a real FBI agent? The innocent question sparked a few chuckles from nearby passengers, breaking the tension. Very real, the mother replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. And I think we just saw why you should never judge someone by how they look. The woman's eyes darted around the cabin, taking in the sea of phones pointed at her, the disapproving faces, and most importantly, the calm, professional federal agent whose presence in first class she had so vocally questioned. She knew, in that moment, that her actions would have consequences far beyond this flight. The badge continued to gleam under the cabin lights, a symbol of authority that had just delivered one of life's most powerful lessons about prejudice and assumptions. The next few minutes would determine not just whether she'd be flying today, but potentially the course of her entire future. The next few moments unfolded like a scene from a movie. 2 airline security officers appeared at the front of the cabin, their uniforms crisp and their expressions serious. The lead flight attendant had quietly called them while the drama was unfolding, following standard protocol for handling disruptive passengers. Ma'am, the taller officer said firmly but professionally, we need you to gather your belongings and come with us. His tone left no room for argument. The woman's designer handbag slipped from her shoulder, landing with a soft thud on the floor. Her perfectly curated image of success and authority had shattered, leaving behind someone who looked small and lost. But my meeting. I have an important presentation tomorrow morning, she protested weakly. You should have thought about that before disturbing the peace and harassing another passenger, the second officer replied. Please collect your things. As she fumbled with her carry-on bag in the overhead compartment, other passengers' phones continued recording. The young tech entrepreneur spoke up again. Don't worry, everyone. This will all be on social media within the hour. Hashtag First Class Karen is about to trend. The retired military officer nodded approvingly. Sometimes the best lessons in life come with a heavy price tag, he commented, his voice carrying the weight of experience. Several passengers broke into spontaneous applause as the security officers began escorting her toward the exit. The sound seemed to finally break through her remaining facade of superiority. Tears started streaming down her face, smearing her expensive mascara. Wait, she turned suddenly, facing Special Agent Wilson. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. But her words trailed off as she realized how hollow they sounded after her earlier behavior. Wilson simply nodded, his professional demeanor never wavering. I hope you learned something from this experience, he said quietly. Change starts with recognizing our own prejudices. As she walked down the aisle, phone cameras following her exit, a flight attendant was already reaching for the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the delay. We'll begin our departure preparations as soon as possible. The woman's final walk of shame down the jet bridge was accompanied by the whispers and looks of other passengers waiting to board. Word had already spread about what had happened, and several people were shaking their heads in disgust. Back in the first-class cabin, a sense of relief washed over the passengers. The elderly lady across the aisle smiled warmly at Wilson. Young man, you handled that with remarkable grace. Your parents must be very proud. The mother with the young child used the moment as a teaching opportunity. See, honey, that's why we never judge people by how they look. That man is a hero who helps keep our country safe. The child nodded solemnly, then brightened. Can I see your badge again, mister? I want to be an FBI agent, too. Wilson smiled and showed his credentials once more, this time to amazed gasps from the child and appreciative nods from nearby passengers. The same badge that had silenced the woman's tirade was now bringing joy to a young admirer. Meanwhile, in the terminal, airline officials were processing the woman's removal from the flight and adding her name to their no-fly list. Her phone, which had recorded everything, would soon provide evidence that would have far-reaching consequences for her career and reputation. The captain's voice came over the intercom. Folks, we apologize for the delay. We'll be pushing back from the gate in about 5 minutes. Thank you for your patience, and thank you to those who stood up for what's right today. As the plane prepared for takeoff, passengers were already sharing their videos online. The incident would soon go viral, becoming another powerful example of how prejudice and entitlement can lead to very public downfalls. By the next morning, the incident had exploded across social media. The videos, taken from multiple angles in the first-class cabin, painted a clear picture of what had happened. News stations picked up the story, running headlines about the FBI agent who maintained perfect composure in the face of discrimination. The real estate company where the woman worked was flooded with calls and messages. Their social media pages were overwhelmed with comments from people sharing their own experiences with discrimination. Within hours, they released a statement. We are aware of the incident involving one of our executives. This behavior does not reflect our company's values. We have placed the employee in question on immediate administrative leave pending a full investigation. The airline also took swift action, releasing their own statement. We have a zero-tolerance policy for discriminatory behavior. The passenger involved has been permanently banned from flying with us. We commend our crew members and other passengers who stood up against discrimination. 3 days after the incident, Special Agent Wilson received an unexpected invitation. A civil rights organization wanted him to be the keynote speaker at their annual conference. Your dignity in the face of prejudice has inspired millions, the invitation read. He accepted, seeing an opportunity to turn an ugly incident into a teaching moment. The woman's professional life crumbled quickly. Her real estate firm, after a brief investigation, terminated her employment. Their final statement was brief but clear. We have ended our relationship with the executive involved in the recent airline incident. Our company stands firmly against all forms of discrimination. But the story wasn't just about consequences. It was about change. The retired military officer who had stood up that day started receiving messages from other veterans, thanking him for speaking out. When we served, he told a local news station, we protected everyone's rights, not just some people's. That doesn't stop when we take off the uniform. The young tech entrepreneur's video went viral, reaching over 10 million views. Comments poured in from around the world. This is what real justice looks like. Respect to the FBI agent for staying professional. Love how everyone stood together against hate. A week later, the airline invited Special Agent Wilson to their corporate headquarters. They wanted his input on improving their training programs for handling discrimination incidents. Your experience can help us better serve all our passengers, they explained. Wilson agreed, turning a personal incident into an opportunity for systemic change. The mother whose child had been fascinated by Wilson's badge wrote a touching post that went viral. Today my son asked me what makes someone a real hero. I told him about the FBI agent who showed that true strength isn't about power or status. It's about dignity, respect, and standing up for what's right. Local schools began using the incident as a teaching moment in their social studies classes. Teachers reported that students were having meaningful discussions about prejudice, respect, and the consequences of assumptions. The woman herself eventually posted a public apology video. Her face looked different now, humbled, changed. "I've lost my job, my reputation, and my dignity," she said, tears in her eyes. "But I've gained something more valuable, the realization that I needed to change. I'm now working with anti-bias organizations to educate others about the dangers of prejudice." As for Special Agent Wilson, he returned to his work at the FBI, continuing to protect all Americans regardless of their background. He kept the many thank you messages he received, not as trophies, but as reminders that sometimes the biggest impact we can have is through how we handle life's difficult moments. The incident became more than just another viral video. It became a powerful reminder that justice doesn't always need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needs everyday people willing to stand up for what's right, and someone strong enough to face prejudice with dignity.